I work as a pizza jockey, aka a delivery boy, in my spare time. The other day, an order was made. We live in a pretty small town, which only really has a McDonald's and a Pizza Hut, considering the Pizza Hut is located at the shopping center, which is basically smack dab in the middle of town. We delivered pretty much everywhere within the town's limits, and if we had the time, we'd go out to the local farms as well. Now, I would always handle the in-town deliveries, but I worked later than the pizza jockey who handled the farms, so sometimes I would have to deliver to those farms very late at night. There was recently a local ad for an outside room for hire at one of the farms, which also happened to be my friend's farm. Shortly after, someone hired the room, and we got a delivery from that place. To no one's surprise, I was the one who had to deliver. When I got there, it was completely quiet, eerily so. I texted my friend to see what was going on. I asked them where they were, only for them to tell me they had all gone into town to visit the local swimming pool. The only people that were supposed to be on that farm were me and the people who'd hired the outside room. I go over to the door. I knock. No answer. I call out to whoever might be there. "Hey, your pizza's here." Still no answer. In the very next instant, all I could see was pure white. Someone had been hiding behind the wall, and they sprayed talcum powder, of all things, directly into my eyes. I stumbled backward and tried to rub my eyes clean. In the process, I dropped the pizza. The man grabbed it and rushed into his car, a red Toyota. I was extremely confused and disoriented. I decided I needed to get into my car and drive away as fast as possible. I had no idea what was going to happen if I stayed there. As my engine started up, I could hear his do so as well. The man started to follow me. My eyes were still sore and blurry. I rushed my way to the police station. As soon as he saw I was en route to the police, he took a sharp turn in another direction. The next day, I told my boss about what happened, and he kind of freaked out at me for losing a pizza. Then he said he was glad I was okay. I called my friend, telling him that guy was crazy, and soon the poster for the outside room was up again. The pizza thief had been kicked out. Yeah, he really thought he would get away with that. My eyes were still itching even a couple of days later. The guy was soon under arrest in the police station for a couple of weeks, after which he moved out of town shortly after. I'll provide a bit of background for everyone. I'm currently 29 and female, and this took place when I was 14 years old. I had just started 8th grade actually. I grew up in Southeast Texas, and as I'm sure many of y'all know, fall is still pretty much part of hurricane season. It was a Friday night, and it was just me and my mother at home. My dad was out of town for work. I originally had some plans to go spend the night at a friend's house, but there was a tropical storm coming in, and my mom decided last minute that she would rather have me at home that night. I was pretty damn pissed, of course. Tropical storms weren't normally looked at too seriously. I honestly felt like she was overreacting. Of course, this was my I'm 14 and therefore a grown-up mentality at work here. Still, my mom did feel bad, so we rented a bunch of movies and ordered a pizza and got a bunch of ice cream for a great night in. My parents' bedroom was on the opposite end of the house from mine. This part is important for later. We lived in a split-level house. The house I grew up in was built in 1950 and was a post-modern style. Think Frank Lloyd Wright. The entire back part of the house was all floor-to-ceiling windows. Think of it as just a huge wall of glass. The entire house was an open floor plan, so the kitchen was the first defined room with walls on the first floor. My bedroom was directly off the kitchen, while my parents' room was at the top of the stairs. She had gone to bed around 10 p.m. I went off to my room to watch 2 movies I had rented just for myself. The storm was really starting to kick into high gear. The wind was picking up, and it was raining sideways. I was in the middle of watching The New Guy, and I still remember looking at my clock. It said 12:53 a.m. I was getting pretty tired, and I could feel my eyes getting heavy. With the weather so bad, I remember thinking that maybe it wasn't so bad that I'd missed the sleepover that night. At some point, I must have dozed off though, because the next thing I remember was just hearing this huge crash. It was one of the big windows in either the dining room or living room. Our neighborhood was in a well-wooded area, and I thought that maybe a tree branch had fallen in the storm and broken the window. I left my room and went out to the kitchen. Right as I was approaching the doorway from the kitchen to the dining room, I could see my mom coming down the stairs. At that very same moment, I saw a man standing in our dining room, covered in broken glass and blood. Due to where he was standing, I could not get to my mom. The man seemed to be young, early 20s, soaking wet and with no shoes on. I could see that he'd clearly just run through our window. He was bleeding all over, with glass sticking out of him at all parts, and was standing barefoot in the broken glass as well. It took him a second to register my mother and I. When he did though, he immediately launched into this explanation of how he was being chased by someone who wanted to kill him, and we needed to call the cops right now. My still fairly innocent 14-year-old brain didn't doubt this at all, but my mom was eyeing him quite suspiciously. We moved into the kitchen. My mom grabbed her purse and my arm to keep me close. I had grabbed a kitchen towel to try and help his bleeding. My mom pulled out her cell phone and started calling our neighborhood patrol. I noticed this, and so on our landline I called 911. We finished both of our calls, and now we were just waiting. The man couldn't seem to sit still and kept getting up and peeking through our kitchen windows, pacing back and forth. He didn't seem to notice he was cut up and bleeding everywhere. He was muttering under his breath. What happened next happened extremely fast and became a bit blurry. All of a sudden, the doorbell rang. I assumed it was our neighborhood patrol that my mom had called. The doorbell immediately sent the man into a panic. He jumped up and sprinted and grabbed a hold of me. He had me in a chokehold, and my mom was now screaming to let me go. He was looking around frantically, pulling me through the dining room and the living room, back towards our stairs. The doorbell began to ring again. My mom was still following close, begging him to let me go. He now had me at the bottom of the stairs, and my mom had a choice to go to the front door to open it, or to follow him up with me. She ran for the door, just as he pulled me up the last of the stairs. I could hear our alarms start blaring. Normally, we arm it at night, so you would need to type in the code before going out the door. He pulled me into my parents' room. As soon as we got inside, he dropped me and started to freak out. He was saying something about all the lights. He began to smash all the lamps and all the light bulbs as well, trying to get the lights to turn off. He was screaming that they were burning him. There was a small garden just off my parents' bedroom, and they had garden lights they turned on at night. He took up a chair and threw it at the glass door, trying to smash it so he could get out and break those lights as well. At least, that's what it seemed like. I had crawled into a corner to get away from him at this point. When he completely turned away from me to grab another chair, I made a run for it. I sprinted down the stairs. The cops had made it into the house at this point and were at the bottom of the stairs with their guns drawn. One of them swiftly grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the way once I reached the bottom. They took me outside to an ambulance and my mom. My adrenaline was coming down now. When it hit me what just happened, I started shaking and could feel a pain around my throat from where he'd been holding me in the chokehold. There was a ton of yelling and screaming from inside. About 10 minutes later, the cops came out with the guy in handcuffs. When he saw me, he tried to lunge at me, which was terrifying. I had a bruised windpipe, but otherwise I was relatively okay. I learned later that the guy was 20 years old and a chemistry major at one of the universities in town. Together with some friends who were also chem students, they had made their own PCP. Now he had never tried PCP before, and he had a bad reaction. They had been driving to get some food when he'd started acting paranoid and upset. At the drive-thru, he insisted they let him out, and as soon as they did, he took off into the night. Apparently, thinking you're being chased is a common hallucination to have when you're on a bad trip of PCP. Light sensitivity is also a common side effect. He wasn't a bad kid. He'd never been in trouble before. He was a good student, pretty much the last person you'd think that would do something like this. Our house just happened to be the only one on our street that was not completely fenced off, and that's how he was able to reach the back and those windows. When I got older, it really hit me just how easy it is to become just like that kid. I had friends who wound up being chemistry majors and also DIY'd some of their own drugs. Thankfully, the night didn't end up worse, because it definitely could have gone in an entirely different direction. It was late spring of my 7th year in school. It was a rough school in a sketchy area. It was my 3rd year of middle school. I was in a program to better integrate classes. The enrollment for the program was fairly small, even smaller numbers for women, so making female friends in this isolated environment was difficult at best. That's when I met Sabrina. She wanted to have me and her friend Kylie spend the night, and I was absolutely thrilled. She lived in an apartment with her mother and brother that was across from a racetrack and a bar. Super sketchy area. Her mother apparently sold handmade keychains at the flea market each weekend. Things started to get weird about the time we ordered pizza and a movie. Her mother was a little bit odd and hung out the whole time, like she was a 13-year-old girl, regularly going into her room and calling Sabrina back with her. We couldn't ask what was up because her mom was always there. This was the age of pagers. Finally, around 9 p.m., her mom went to bed. To our dismay though, 10 minutes later, she called Sabrina to come to bed with her. Apparently, she was going to stay with her mom at her own damn sleepover. So, left with a couple of pillows that had seen better days, and no blankets or bedding at all. Kylie and I were going to have a sleepover by ourselves. We started the movie back up and tried to make the best of it when Sabrina came out to get the phone. As she was about to go back into the room, she whispered to us, "Don't stay up too late now. We have to go to the flea market tomorrow and leave at 5:30. I guess she saw our faces. She did this creepy little laugh and said, "You didn't think the pizza was free, did you?" She then rushed into the room and locked the door behind her. Kylie, who I just met this evening, and I exchanged glances. This was the first we were hearing about this. We were never even asked. After a short conversation, we both decided we wanted to go home. Our parents were more likely to be awake now than early the next morning. We went to knock on the bedroom door to tell them we wanted to go home, only to be met with no answer. We tried again, but nothing. There was no way they were asleep that fast. I went to the kitchen to see if there was another phone. Nope. They'd locked us in the living room of this one-bedroom apartment with no phone and no restroom, and now they refused to respond to us at all. This is where the young and dumb us formulated a plan. We knew the school was not too far away. Kylie said she lived nearby, so we decided to find a payphone and walk to her house together. I mean, how bad could it be? Biggest mistake of our lives. We tried knocking one last time, only to be met with the same result. We gathered up our belongings and made a plan to leave. We snuck out through a window. How the world changed outside after 10 p.m. The bar, a stone's throw from the apartment, was absolutely jumping. We went up to the payphone that was near the street and close by the rear of the bar. Great. Just to our luck, it was broken. As I put the receiver down, this drunk, burly man rounded the corner towards us. We were two 13-year-olds, but we could have passed for 17 easy. Neither of us were dressed showing much skin, but the drunk dude apparently really liked what he saw. First, he yelled and asked if we wanted to party, or if he could buy us some drinks. "No thanks," we replied, and started to walk in the direction of her home. This seemed to infuriate the man. He was now yelling that we were skanks, and nobody ever turned their back to him. We tried to keep moving on, only for him to stumble after us surprisingly quickly. He caught Kylie by the wrist. She was trying to shake him off, but he was much too strong. He started telling us what he was going to do to us. We were terrified because she couldn't break his hold and he refused to let go. That's when I landed a shot right to his family jewels. We took off running, but that must have sobered him up quite some bit because he got even angrier in his pursuit. We scanned the area, but there was no place to hide, no place to get help either, and we were now not trusting if we saw someone that might help us. The area had quite a few ladies of the night and other sketchy people. We ran back to loop around the apartment Sabrina lived in, but somehow one of Mr. Drunk's friends had joined his pursuit. We know he was behind us. He was alternating between telling us what he was going to do to us and yelling to his friend, saying there was one for each of them and to not let us get away. Now we were trapped. We booked it, much to my chagrin, up the metal stairs and onto the second floor. We started pounding on doors, but in that area, nobody was going to open their door past dark. Luckily, we found an open door at the very end. We were in the clear, or so we thought. I could hear the clink-clank of one of them coming up. The stairs had no second floor visibility, luckily. We dashed into the room, only to see it was a laundry room with no door to lock. We started wedging ourselves between the machines, praying and hoping we would not be found. The man was on the second floor and heading our way. Everything went quiet, except the distant voices and music from the bar. He didn't leave, I think. I didn't hear him going down the stairs at least. That's when the aroma of alcohol and smoke descended upon the air. He was in the doorway, listening for us. "I know you're in there, girls. There's nowhere for you to go now. If you come out, I'll forgive the bitch that kicked my nuts, and I'll go easy on you both. So come on out." After a moment, he spoke again, and his mood flipped once more. "Okay, you fucking bitches. I'm gonna yank you out by your hair and you get the idea. Rough like I like it." I'd love to say someone overheard all this and intervened, but of course, they did not. After what seemed like an eternity, he stood there for about 20 minutes before we heard him descend the stairs. We hid for another 15 before checking to see if it was safe to leave. Long story short, we made it to Kylie's house, which was not as close by as she'd said. Still though, we had our lives. My father came to get me after midnight. The next morning, Sabrina's mother called and feigned cluelessness as to why we would leave. She claimed we'd never knocked and lied about snatching the phone. She thought it was normal to make her daughter's friends work for free. Sabrina and I didn't speak much after, needless to say, and Kylie's parents believed all of Sabrina's mother's nonsense and grounded her for an entire month. This all happened such a long time ago, but it still stays with me and haunts me to this day. This happened about 6 years ago, but first, a little bit of backstory. Back then, I was in university and lived about 10 hours away from my parents. It was a long drive, and our hometown was super boring, so I only ever visited for Christmas. That year though, because I was going through a bad breakup, I decided to go home for the summer, wanting to just be lazy and sunbathe in my parents' garden with some trashy novels. Luck had it that my cousin who lived next door, who was 2 years younger than me and basically like my sister, was also home visiting her mom. My parents had a big dog that looked pretty scary but was a gentle giant, and a surrogate mother to our kittens. Anyway, I was home for a couple of months, and my parents were going on a holiday for about 2 weeks to the other side of the country. I was okay being home alone, although it was a bit weird. At this point, I'd been living in a big city for a few years now, and I wasn't used to everything being so deadly quiet at night. All I could hear was crickets, and maybe sometimes a wild animal on the nearby mountains calling out into the night. It made it quite hard to sleep. I decided to move into my parents' bedroom. At least they had a TV in there, and I could keep it on at night for some background noise. One night, my cousin came to spend the night with me. Her mom was working the night shift, and she didn't want to be home alone. We decided to watch some horror movies and eat a pizza in bed. At some point, I fell asleep, but my cousin Anna could not get to sleep so easily. She was quite jumpy already and easily scared, so of course the movies got her really freaked out. I was deep in sleep when she woke me up super freaked out, saying someone was in the house. My mind was foggy and I could barely keep my eyes open. I tried to tell her she was being paranoid and she should go back to sleep. She insisted there was someone in the house and she was shaking and crying now. I started to really worry about her. I sat up and tried to shake myself awake when I began to hear a noise downstairs, as if someone had just closed some drawers in the kitchen. I flinched and put the TV on mute. I got up and slowly locked the bedroom door, then tiptoed back to bed to listen carefully. Now that I was more alert, I could hear the wooden floors creaking as if someone was walking around. At this point, I joined Anna in the freakout. My parents had a sensor light in the hallway. It was placed in the middle of the stairs, so it would go on if someone was walking around both upstairs or downstairs. I heard the click of the light going on, and I could see the light under the bedroom door. I was now 100% sure someone was in the house with us. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the town was in the middle of fucking nowhere, and I found I had no service. My cousin was bawling. I had to give her a pillow to put over her mouth to muffle the noise. She was holding down on it and even bit it to stop herself from screaming. Whoever was in the house was now climbing up the stairs. My mind was going 100 miles an hour, and I was trying to think of all the possible scenarios. My best hope was that some neighbor had noticed my parents' car being gone for a few days. They know our dog is harmless, and they know my folks are doing quite well for themselves, so maybe they were trying to snatch some jewelry or something. I figured that if we kept quiet, they'd take whatever they wanted and then leave quickly. I told my cousin to quietly get under the bed. I looked out the window and saw nothing on the street. Since my parents' bedroom is next to mine, and mine has a balcony, I figured that if push came to shove, we could climb out the window, reach the balcony, and since it's overlooking the vegetable garden, we could jump and hop into the soft soil and hope we wouldn't break too many bones. As I moved to crawl under the bed as well, the doorknob began to rattle. Someone was trying to get in. I froze, and I swore time stopped in place. My heart was beating like crazy. I looked around, but the only weapon I could see was my mom's crochet needle in a basket by the bed. I grabbed it, figuring I was gonna have to stab this sucker in the eye or something. The doorknob rattled for a few more seconds, then the intruder walked away. I could hear them shuffling through the rest of the rooms on the floor, but they were moving far too quickly to take anything. The worst thoughts crept into my head. My dad is a detective, and he's worked some horrible cases, some involving organized crime. What if someone was there for him? It wouldn't have been the first time our family was threatened. If that was the case, I might very well be dead by morning. This thought shot adrenaline through my body, and I couldn't hear anything for a few moments. I decided I had to get out of the room and find some way to contact the police. My cousin begged me to stay, but all I could think about was the worst-case scenario. If they really wanted revenge on my father or something, they would burn the house down with us in it. As stupid as it may sound now, I was worried for my dog as well. She was out there all alone. If someone were to approach her, she'd probably lick their fingers right before they stabbed her or something. I took my phone and my crochet needle and bravely left the room. I stepped into my parents' dressing room and took my dad's baseball bat as well. Then I began to make my way down the stairs. The front door was wide open. As I walked outside, I could see a man running away into the night. I immediately called the police on the landline, and to my surprise, they told me a call had already been made for that address. They were on their way. I assumed my cousin had somehow called when I was gone, so I didn't question it. The police arrived in less than a minute. It was not my cousin who called. It took us a while to understand what was going on. The officer was just as confused as I was. In the end, what happened was this. My neighbors had not been made aware I was home for the summer. They knew my parents were gone and they saw the lights on in the house, so they began to worry. I didn't lock the door that night because I forgot, and my dog had the habit of opening it with its paws and taking a nap on the sofa downstairs. It seems she'd opened the door at some point in the evening and decided to go back. The door was left wide open. My neighbor thought someone was in the middle of doing something nefarious, so he went to the kitchen to grab a knife from the drawer and walked around to make sure nobody was in the house. He called the police, and when I got out of the bedroom, he heard me. He got scared and ran away.